Oh, thank you, Sheila. Good evening and welcome to Christ Church Cathedral. Are you going to do a territorial acknowledgement? You will, so I will leave that to you. All right, thank you very much. My name is Ansley Tucker. I am the Dean here, and I have arrived without my notes. So I'm kind of winging it, but I kind of know what I want to say. And it is, first of all, welcome to you at this first concert in the last season of the Lafayette String Quartet. Let's give them a hand, shall we? We are so grateful to have had opportunities to collaborate with you before and are so honored to be part of this version of your Health Awareness Forum. This seems to me like something that all of us, wherever we come from, should be engaged in and concerned about. And the arts have such a way of giving voice to the things that matter here in our lives. So bless you. We can't wait to hear what's happening. I do want to introduce our special guest this evening in a moment, and I've sort of given it away. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't take the opportunity with a microphone in front of me to do a couple of advertisements. So I want you to know that we love strings in this place, and our quartet in residence is the Emily Carr String Quartet, and they're doing the whole of the Mendelssohn String Quartets this season, and the next one will be on October the 14th at 5 o'clock, just before dinner, right? And you can get more information about that on the Cathedral website, which is, get this, Christ Church Cathedral.bc.ca. I'm sure you can figure that out. And we're also kind of joining into the late October fun in our society this year with a Festival of the Dead. So we've got silent films with live music. So one of these is The Phantom of the Opera with the well-known, internationally in fact, acclaimed organist David Briggs. And then the other one is The Passion of Joan of Arc. And that will be brought to us with the Vox Humana, who's a chamber choir here in, I'm working through all the places I've lived. It's not Toronto, it's not Calgary, it's Victoria. And again, you can find more information about that on our website. We're just thrilled that Sheila Rogers has come to introduce us to this evening. Sheila is well known by reputation, but not just reputation, action, in not just here either, but in our country. Recently having stepped aside as the Chancellor of the University of Victoria. She is also a well-known broadcaster, currently and in the past, particularly CBC, Mother Corp, as they have been told they call it. She is an activist for things that matter, such as mental health and environment. You have said, I gather you have said that in your Doesn't sound like leisure. You're planning to devote yourself to these issues, and bless you for that. Thank you so much, indeed, indeed. My friends, please welcome Sheila Rogers.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dean Ansley. And good evening to all of you here in the cathedral, and to those of you who are watching online as well. What an honor to be introduced by Dean Ansley. It was lovely. And it is also a great honor to pay respect and to thank the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations for sharing their unceded territory with us, their ways of knowing, their ways of being, their worldview. And they do this with such great generosity. So hi Sepka to them. I've just read a wonderful book by the late Cree lawyer and writer Harold R. Johnson, and it's called The Power of Story. And right at the beginning, he acknowledges the people who are the original occupants of the land, and then he acknowledges the actual land itself. So he thanks the land. He thanks all the trees. I bet he would thank the mushrooms as well, Suzanne. He thanks the plants. He thanks the animals. He thanks the grasses, all the species, everything else, and all the spirits of this place, all part of a shared story that we're all included in, everyone. How wonderful it is to be able to gather together for this final Lafayette Health Awareness Forum after some challenging years of being apart. For 17 years, the members of the Lafayette String Quartet have looked forward to this special evening with community. They and their terrific partners, the steering committee, have worked hard to get this evening together. And they began with a presiding idea. What affects one of us affects all of us. And when you think about it, when one member of a quartet has a problem, the rest of the quartet is going to feel it. Let's face it, we are all better and stronger together. The health awareness forums have covered topics ranging from, and you can see some of the posters, or you could, up there, from a dialogue on breast cancer, mental health, the HPV vaccine, the power of music, to COVID-19, which I refuse to capitalize. It's a small c for me, always. And my presence with you this evening is co-sponsored by COVID-19. I tested positive at the end of June, and the physical symptoms lifted, but I was left in a sort of mental miasma that now has the name of long COVID brain fog. I'm still stuck there, and I'm entering into my 4th month. And I want my money back, COVID, I really do. And you could say I've lost my mind, because it certainly feels that way sometimes. I have trouble thinking for long periods of time, difficulty reading, which is great if you host a national book show, it's really great. Little trouble writing. I mix things up, and I've learned to appreciate the humor in this. The other day I bought a large cookie to share with my husband, Charlie, and I turned my back to pour some tea, and half the cookie was gone. And I said, what happened? When I put the cookie on the plate, it was a full squirrel. I meant circle. And instead of offering people my sympathy, I've offered them my symptoms, vultures for vouchers, and I have reacquired my old friend dyslexia. Now, I know I'm speaking for many people, and maybe even in this great hall this evening, when I say COVID sucks. And I acknowledge that, but I also must acknowledge my good fortune. My CBC colleagues are accommodating my brain fog. They're editing me so that I sound almost normal, and making things comfortable. The word accommodate means to make comfortable. And the Lafayette String Quartet, particularly Pamela Aloni, has made accommodation for me, checking in on me for months and understanding my limits by giving me the opportunity to talk a bit about long COVID, because when we talk about hard things, they become less hard. So let's remember to accommodate people, and let's remember to make them feel comfortable and a part of things. And let's follow the example of the Lafayette String Quartet and act with empathy. What's become clear over the course of the pandemic and the course of all the Lafayette Health Awareness Forums is the importance and need for science and art in our lives, for both of them to work in concert, if that's not too cheesy. I had the honor of hosting the 15th Health Awareness Forum from my studio on Gabriola Island, and it was a virtual experiment that we thought would never be repeated again. But last year it was repeated again, and I think now we've got the most wonderful compromise, because we can be live and we can be online at the same time, so it's great. Music, obviously, binds the members of the Lafayette Quartet. Life's joys, life's challenges have enhanced who they are and what they have to say in their music. This year they celebrate their 37th year together, and they will take their final bow together this year. And it is such a great honor to share this evening with them. So to begin, we're going to hear the Allegro from Mozart's quartet in B-flat major, and here are Anne Elliott Goldschmidt, Sharon Stannis, Joanna Hood, and Pam Haiba Aloni. Please welcome the Lafayette String Quartet.
Just wanted to check in if everyone can hear me. Yes, perfect. Thank you so much to the Lafayette String Quartet. Mozart, how perfect to open the evening. My name is Amita Modi, and I'm a physician and a member of the steering committee of the Lafayette Health Awareness Forum. It's a great pleasure tonight to be able to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Val Stoynova. Dr. Stoynova is a practicing general internist in community and tertiary care in Victoria at Island Health and a clinical associate professor with the University of British Columbia. Her work on climate-conscious prescribing was recently selected as a national innovation in partnership with the Cascades Network to further develop, implement, and study sustainable inpatient care. She sits on the National Advisory Committee for Inhaler Sustainability and is a frequent guest lecturer on sustainable healthcare at local and national conferences. A passionate cyclist and climate advocate, Dr. Stoynova believes we can provide better healthcare at a lower carbon cost. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stoynova.
How's this? Thank you. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Amit. I really appreciate it, and thank you for having me in this event. It is an absolute honor to be here. Climate change is the greatest threat to human health in the 21st century. This is undeniable, and these are the facts. Next slide, please. We're in a climate crisis. The last year, 2021, has been very difficult for everyone. In addition to the pandemic, we've had a number of critical climate events. We've had the third worst forest fire season on record. The heat dome took the lives of 595 British Columbians. The town of Lytton, BC burned to the ground, and the province nearly flooded due to deforestation and flash floods. I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but we were about an inch of water away from having to evacuate one of the hospitals in town when this happened, which would have been a logistical nightmare for the patients and for the healthcare staff as well. It's been a trying and difficult time. However, this is not the end-all and be-all. We can turn this around if we lower our carbon emissions. When it comes to healthcare-related climate emissions, we're in a very unique position where, on one hand, we are responsible for taking care of patients that come in with climate-related catastrophes. We are seeing increasing rates of anxiety, increasing rates of PTSD, increasing rates of anxiety and PTSD related to critical climate events. We are seeing things that disproportionately affect the most vulnerable of our populations. Up north, land-based food security is threatened. We are seeing decreasing safety in ice road-related travel because of rising temperatures. When it comes to local, if you wouldn't mind switching, thank you. As a healthcare provider and as an internal medicine specialist, I mostly deal with the inside squishy bits from the clavicle to the pelvis. And this is where my expertise lies. The next step to moving from the inside squishy bits to planetary health and actually dealing with the health of a population and a planet in addition to the health of individual organs really came about through a reflection of our own climate impact and how healthcare affects it. In Canada, we know that healthcare is responsible for 33 billion tons of CO2, which is about 4.6% of our national greenhouse gas emissions. This is on par with the aviation industry and is obviously absolutely non-negotiable. It is a terrifically big impact. About a quarter of these emissions are related to medications, both prescription and non-prescription. Next slide, please. Hence the concept of planetary health. So planetary health is how we describe this interrelationship between what happens to the human and what happens to the planet. Our health and the health of future generations is tied to what is occurring globally. And each of us is responsible for taking care of that planet, lowering our carbon emissions, and decreasing the speed at which things are happening. Next slide, please. This is a team effort. I'm definitely not doing this on my own. There's a huge push nationally and locally. We're very lucky to have a planetary health group and a steering committee at Island Health. One of my excellent colleagues, Dr. Carolyn Stigant, I'm not sure if she's here, but she is on this committee, and it is an excellent group of clinicians and administrators, engineers that are all working together in an effort to decrease our health-related carbon footprint. Next slide. And today, I'd like to share with you, as a physician, 3 ways that we can take home today and enact to decrease our collective carbon footprint going forward. Next slide, please. So the first of these is nature prescriptions, and I know how this sounds. There is a strong evidence base behind this. I promise this is real, actual healthcare that is backed by solid evidence. But when it, go back please, thank you. When it comes to nature prescriptions, we know that spending 2 hours outside in nature in 20-minute increments has terrific benefits for health. There was a recent systematic review of 143 papers that looked into this. And in many ways, we found that spending 2 hours in nature a week decreases your risk of cardiovascular disease, so that's diseases affecting the heart and the blood vessels. It decreases people's risk of having a stroke, people's risk of having a heart attack. It decreases the incidence of malignancy or cancer. It decreases inflammation in the body. And we also know that children who spend time out in nature will be more likely to grow up and be environmentalists themselves, which then benefits all of us. Next slide, please. The second way I'd like to talk to you about today is cycle commuting. As somebody without a driver's license, I am very much in favor of this. As a side note, I've gotten to an age where I can actually tell people that this is, a form of social protest, and, I don't drive because I'm pro-environment, and the truth is I'm a little lazy and I just never got around to it. I did bike here tonight, but there are many advantages to cycle commuting. We know that cycle commuting as little as 20 kilometers a week, which is 2.5 kilometers each way, or 5 kilometers a day, has terrific benefits for both physical health, financial health, and planetary health. When it comes to the physical benefits, we know that people who bike to work are 45% less likely to develop cancer within their lifetime. We also know that their risk of heart disease and lung disease lowers by half. We know that cyclists, specifically cycle commuters from large group studies, are 41% less likely to die from any cause of mortality. This is including bad drivers. So I'm a big proponent of this. Financially, it makes a lot of sense. If you're cycling to work, you do not need to pay for parking. You do not need to fill your gas tank. You don't have to pay a car payment. And you get to spend some time outside, and we already know what the benefits of nature can give us. In terms of the environmental impact of biking to and from work, we can have a terrific amount of reduction in our carbon footprint simply by biking. Next slide, please. And this brings me to climate conscious prescribing, which is my area of interest and my area of focus. Specifically, the prescribing related to disease of the respiratory system. So in Canada, we know that asthma affects 3.8 million Canadians. We also know that an additional 500,000 have a type of lung disease called COPD or emphysema, which is often related to years of smoking. The mainstay of treating these diseases is inhalers or inhaled medications, where a small device is used to bring medication into the airway and deliver it to the lungs. When it comes to inhalers, there are many different types. The classic one, the one that we are all known, the lay people always know and bring up in clinic, is the eponymous blue puffer, the one up in the left outer corner. Inhalers have been around for quite a while now. The first inhaler in Canada became commercially available in the 1950s. At the time, the inhalers were created with a CFC, or a chlorofluorocarbon propellant. Now, the CFC propellant, with every squish of the inhaler or the puffer, it propels the medication from the canister into someone's lungs. The challenge with this is CFCs are potent greenhouse gases, and they are very thermostable. So with every squirt, not only does the medication come out, but the propellant also comes out. It is then going to move very thermostable, so it's going to move into the stratosphere, where it will be degraded by UV light and create free radicals, which will then damage the ozone layer. Around the 1980s, we realized that there is a hole in the ozone layer, at which point we all banded together. 192 countries signed the Montreal Protocol in 1987, the goal of which was to decrease the hole in the ozone layer through decreasing likelihood of these chemicals, specifically CFCs. Through the late 1980s and the early 1990s, we very rapidly transitioned from CFCs and our propellants to a completely different propellant called HFA, or hydrofluoroalkane, and this is what we have today. HFA is in most inhalers in Canada. Now, HFA does not degrade the ozone layer. However, it is very carbon intensive. The most common one, HFA 134, is 1,300 times more potent than CO2. I know. And my personal journey to planetary health really started with a single number, which is 290. 290 is the number of kilometers you have to drive in a standard gasoline-powered vehicle to generate the same amount of greenhouse gases you would in 1 meter dose inhaler. I know, I'm just going to take a minute to test it with you. So we realized that the carbon impact of this was absolutely phenomenal. So back in 1997, we signed onto the Kyoto Protocol, where the goal was to decrease 7 key greenhouse gases that are responsible for the majority of global warming, HFA among them. Since then, there was this boom of inhaler-related innovation, and they have created inhaler upon inhaler that no longer requires this propellant. These are called the dry powder inhalers. Instead of having a propellant that pushes the medication out of the canister each time you squirt, this time, the patient's lungs are responsible for drawing the medication out with inhalation or with a breath in. So you've got 3 examples of those on the right side. It was very hard to find images without any brand names on them. But there are 9 currently available in Canada. A single meter dose inhaler, about 290 kilometers, but if we take it to the health authority level, so we know studies from the NHS or the health authority over in the UK show that 3.5% of their entire carbon footprint is exclusively related to meter dose inhalers. So think about that for a minute. All the carbon, all the trash we generate, the electricity needed to heat, light a building, the compost that's created, the garbage, 3.5% of all of that carbon is just inhalers. The fact that it is even on the radar is ridiculous. We know that worldwide, back in 2018, we produced 18 million meter dose inhalers, which is equivalent to 13 billion tons of CO2 just from inhalers alone. Now, when it comes to actually reducing your carbon footprint, we have excellent alternatives. And not everybody will be able to have a dry powder inhaler. Nobody should feel bad if their disease requires to have a treatment. And if this is really the best treatment for you and it's working and the alternative does not apply, then by all means, this is an important treatment and nobody should have that withheld. As an internal medicine specialist, obviously, I want my patients to do well. I want them to be healthy, and I want to do it in a way that does not harm future generations' ability to take care of their own patients. I want to provide excellent, high-quality patient care, and I don't want to do it at the expense of the planet. And this is one of those areas that is win-win-win. The majority of people will be able to switch to an alternate inhaler or a dry powder inhaler. We know that studies from Sweden, from Denmark, 88 to 90% of their population is treated with a dry powder inhaler. In Canada, it's about 75 to 80% meter dose inhaler. So Sweden and Denmark are doing excellent in terms of the management of the respiratory diseases. They have the same rates of asthma we do. They have the same rates of severe asthma. They do not have any more emergency department visits, no more people on critical care, no more people on life support because of asthma, yet they managed to figure out how to do this at a fraction of the carbon costs, and we can too. This is really one of those precious areas in medicine where we can see better outcomes in terms of the care of lung disease. We can see decrease in our carbon footprint, and the kicker, this is actually cheaper. It's cheaper for the patient, it is cheaper for the healthcare authority, and it's cheaper for the government. So this is one of those no-brainers, win-win-win type of situations. So what are we doing about it? Along with a colleague, Celia, hi Celia, we have created the Critical Air Project. It is this slowly emerging, growing behemoth of a project aiming to decrease our inhaler-related carbon footprint. Locally, we are including low-carbon options within our hospitals. We are improving disposal of inhalers. We are working on the BC guidelines, making sure that low-carbon inhalers are prioritized. And nationally, we're part of an educational campaign that is teaching healthcare providers how to take care of the environment in addition to taking care of the patient, because the two need not be mutually exclusive. Next up, please. So my take-home points for you today are threefold. Firstly, green care is great care. Please make sure to spend time outside in nature. The benefits are excellent, and it is cheap. If you're able to cycle, get out there. It is a lot cheaper to buy a bicycle than it is to treat a heart attack. So it's very much a good way to go about things. And thirdly, please talk to your primary care provider to see if a low-carbon inhaler option is the right choice for you. I'd like to leave you with the words of the Lorax from Dr. Seuss. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to change. It's not. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Val, for a wonderful and very thought-provoking presentation. I'm delighted to be able to introduce our next speaker, Katlia Lafferty. Katlia is a Northern Dene Cree Métis novelist, freelancer, and columnist. She's a member of the Yellowknives Dene First Nation from Sombequet, Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. Currently residing on the occupied and unceded lands of the Coast Salish peoples in Lekwungen Territory, she is in her 4th year of the Juris Doctor in Common Law and Indigenous Legal Orders with the University of Victoria. Welcome, Katlia.
Masicho, that means thank you in my language. So yes, I am from the Northwest Territories. I've been living here in Lekwungen Territory for the past 4 years. And tonight I will be reading some poetry, but I wanted to also introduce my grandmother. She's not with me, of course, but she also is always with me. She raised me. And my grandmother lived off of the land. She was born in a teepee, and she was born on an island, and she lived completely off-grid, as we call it nowadays. Hauled water from the lake. Her fridge was a cellar in the permafrost ground. Everything she did was outside, and her father he ran a dog team, and he was a trapper. And she also went to residential school. So I learned a lot from my grandmother, and a lot of my writing is in tribute to her and the teachings that she gave me and passed on to me. So I'll get my poems here. Hopefully I didn't grab my hydro bell by accident. I'm going to try to channel my inner Rupi Kaur tonight. I love poetry, but I am by no means an actual poet. I don't follow the rules of poetry. But I wanted to mention that a lot of my poetry tonight that I'm going to be sharing with you has to do with a word called Deshinta. So Deshinta means land in our language, and we have a land-based university up north that I used to work for, and what we do is we bring people out onto the land, and they essentially become one and connected to the land as much as possible, and it's very healing in many, many ways, and it just brings us right back to nature and just the simplicity of being in nature. So the first poem here is called Nature Destroys Human Creation. It's a loon, so it's a very short poem. Red autumn vines climb over barbed wire fences, inevitably overthrowing empirical concrete inventions. And the next one is called Full Circle. We know what it's like to live on the land, to hunt for our dinner and work with our hands. We know what it's like to kill for feast, to use for shelter, clothing, and heat. We know what it's like to scrape the hides, to tan the pelt and smoke it dry, to use every part meticulously, giving thanks for offering itself for our needs, to use the sinew and the bones, to make the arrows and the bows, to walk for miles in the snow, blinded by winter's glow. Pulling our siblings in the sleigh, packing them on our backs in the rain, running the dogs outside in the cold, trading muskrat fur for gold, using the roots for medicine, plucking the geese in ptarmigan, washing our clothes on a washboard, making fresh bannock with flour and lard, picking wild berries in the fields, fishing without line or reel, checking the nets in the lake, scaling the fish on the cold slate, sleeping on a bed of soft moss, breathing in the morning frost. We know when the birds will arrive from the south. We know when the wolf preys on the grouse. We know when the sun sets in the west, when the robins begin to make their nests. We know the ice melts first in the east, and when in the north it starts to freeze. To sing and dance to our own beat, under the watch of our legends, under the stars in the heavens. In the land of the midnight sun, the elders share their wisdom of the connection between earth and man. They pass this knowledge into our hands. We know what it's like to speak our mother tongue, to be proud of where we are from. We know what it's like to live free, and we must not forget our history. We are the sap that bleeds from the trees. We are the scattered leaves in the breeze. We are the ravens that crow at your door, the bears hungry for more. We are the migration in the barren places, the ancients waiting deep in the lakes, near the cliffs that take your breath away. We are the rumbling deep in the ground, the silent voices ready for sound. We are the last hope of the land. We are the guardians taking a stand. We are the rings on the back of the turtle. Our nations will rise again, full circle. And the next one is Among Nature. And this is actually when I was on my way out to Deshinta for a land camp. We boarded the helicopter and flew across the naked northern landscape. We watched below as the rock face became buried in the last snowfall, draped. Traveling across the starkness to a distant, unknown place. On this day, I was made witness to the curve of the earth, its rounded shape. Our pilot could not see the flock of Arctic swans in front of us and violently swerved. Afraid for my life, I dare not say a word. I don't remember our first day there as I unpacked our gear and settled in for the days ahead. But when I slept like the dead. We came to this place at a time of great escape. A young bear had come into the camp and was shot down on the rotten ice of the lake. It had come to teach us a lesson in give and take. We walked for miles to the lookout point only to look back down on ourselves. I was not used to walking on such uneven ground and often tripped and fell. We walked across an old bridge once built to withstand abundant waters, but now nothing flows under its rickety borders. We hoped that it might be a beaver dam upstream, but we stood silently, knowing it was slowly receding. In turn, we dreaded the predictable summer heat. But when the robin sang its choir, the elder reminded us that it sang for rain to douse the fires. And it worked. It poured. The spring rains drenched the moss and seeped into the earth's floor, melting the last of winter's snow. But the bridge is still useless, though. There is a great foreboding and balance. We could hear it in the sorrowful loon's cry. Though the dog didn't pay no mind, he leapt and bounded in what was left of the creek. In his playfulness, he discovered an old skull, a muskox that died lifetimes ago. On the path in front of us, we spotted 4 flowers in a row. Their white and yellow petals pointed up to the sun, one for each season. Their light green stem a thick stalk, preventing them from withering in the rapidly melting permafrost, reminding us that we are not yet lost. There is still beauty to be found even long after we are gone. I saw a wolverine that evening sitting alone. It sketched across the open water into the bay. Its hunger must have gotten in the way for it to be so brave, to come so close to this dangerous human place, the place that we did not want to leave but had to go back home, back to the scarce reality that we sow. The land is the realest place I'll ever know. It brings out an authenticity that lays bare our souls, a truth in us that we cannot hide. It brings out all that lurks inside. Nature sets the truth free. It was there our anxious hearts found peace, among the whispering trees, among earth's remedies, among nature's bounty. And the last one I'll read is Drifting into the Atmosphere. And this poem I shared with a poet, a professional poet named Linda France in the UK, who I had the pleasure of being pen pals with during my residency at the West Vancouver Memorial Library. And so her poetry was, I wish I could share it with you tonight, but this is my response to one of the poems that she had written to me, and you can find them on the West Vancouver Memorial Library website. I'm only 300 or so counted steps from the ocean, and yet 1,000 miles from my northern home where all is blisteringly cold. I walk my dog around the cemetery. Although there are descendants of discoverers buried, this is all Lekwungen territory. I want to pick a bouquet for my table, but something about the flowers remaining wild and free stopped me. The smell of old growth tumbling to shore drifts through the ocean breeze, calling me near. The only place I can take in a deep, satisfying breath is here. I balance across the naturally fallen cedar giants, careful not to slip as my dog sniffs random sticks. We walk along the ocean side every day, my dog and I. Some days she reminds me of the great sister lakes back home that I've come to know. Soon they will be frozen solid, not able to wave, crash, and roll in an endless dance like the beauty that comes from her. Some days she rages and I must stay away. Some days the life inside her comes up to the surface. Seaweed, coral, kelp, remnants of our own organs. How is it that our bodies reflect nature? Who is the maker? Some days I want to jump right in, she's so clear. Some days I get too close in fear, she might scoop me up and sweep me out. We are all bound by the tides, by the moon moving us. Not only are we connected to Earth, but to the entire universe. Across vast waters, there are identical perennial blooms. In transition between hot and cold, north and south, young and old, we live according to the weather. We all adapt to the temperature. An otter feasted on the evening of the equinox, leaving a row of empty oyster shells dotted along millions of smooth, round pebbles, endlessly pushed and dragged along the ocean floor in a symphonic arrangement along the gorge. The empty shells now displayed on my mantel. Otter, might we share a meal of fresh-sucked oysters? Beyond the bay, I am reduced to a mere speck by the Olympic Mountains. Their snow peaks clear on sunny days like the ocean. They too are constantly changing. We are fortunate to be alive in this crucial time, yet burdened in the helplessness of bearing witness to the fragmentation of a planet I cannot fathom having to abandon. There is no man on the moon. Now is not the time to board the ship. We must first see this battle through, the battle between goodness and greed that is depleting our earthly needs. She is all we ever need. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Many thanks to the quartet for sharing with us tonight a few movements from Carolyn Shaw's The Evergreen. How appropriate for tonight. And thank you to Katlia for her most moving presentation. I have the great pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Suzanne Simard. Suzanne Simard is a professor of forest ecology at the University of British Columbia and the author of the book Finding the Mother Tree. She's a pioneer on the frontier of plant communication and intelligence, and has been hailed as a scientist who conveys complex and technical ideas in a way that's dazzling and profound. Her TED Talks have been viewed by more than 10 million people worldwide. Suzanne is known for her work on how trees interact and communicate using below-ground fungal networks, which has led to the recognition that forests have hub trees or mother trees. Her current research investigates how these complex relationships contribute to forest resiliency, adaptability, recovery, and has far-reaching implications for how to manage and heal forests from human impacts, including climate change. Please join me in welcoming Suzanne Simard.
Thank you so much, and it's my honor and pleasure to be with such an accomplished group of women that have come before me. It's stunning. The music, the wisdom, the poetry. I mean, it's incredible what humans can do. It's incredible that we're in this cathedral that is built by human hands, that is actually modeled after the cathedrals that are our forests. It really is, our ingenuity that has allowed us to thrive on this planet, and I hope meet the moment that we're in as well when we're in this time of climatic crisis. I'm going to start just by dedicating my talk to my dear mom, who passed away 51 days ago, and I miss her dearly. But my mom, I realize, as I'm even looking at this title of this talk, that my mom was my mother tree, and I spent all my life looking for mother trees in the forest, and here Mom was teaching me about how to be a tree the entire time, nurturing her kids, nurturing the young, looking after the society, the community, and then passing on her wisdom as she passed on in a very regenerative and joyful way. So here's to dear Mom. I want to acknowledge that all of the work I'm about to talk to you about has been done on the Shepomek territory in the interior of what we call British Columbia, in collaboration with many First Nations people. And without their work and their wisdom, and the meaning that they bring to it, I don't think this story wouldn't be nearly as rich as it is. So I worked with the Shepomek, the Sinixt Nation, the Ktunaxa Nation, the Coast Salish, the Haltsik, particularly their territory is in what I'm about to talk to you about. Sorry. And I also just to come back to Mom a little bit. I'm reading a book by Ruby Peters, who is a Cowichan elder who just passed away last year. And one of the teachings in her book was that when your parents pass on, that it's actually a time of grief for sure, but also of great joy, in that it gives you an opportunity to rebirth yourself. And as my mom passed, she said to me, keep on with your work, Suzanne. And so I am doing that, and I feel great freedom, and I'm working with an incredible group of women, one of whom is here, Robin June Hood. And I invite you, as I go through my talk, to join us in what we're calling the Mother Tree Network, to meet this moment in time when we're at this of great critical concern in this moment of climate change, because we do have solutions. There are solutions. We don't have to go down this track, as Val mentioned at the beginning of her talk. We can change the course that we're on now. So that's one of the main teachings. Oh, so I'm done now, so no, just kidding. Okay, next slide, please. So we live in a cathedral. We're sitting in a cathedral, but we live in a cathedral. We're living in one of the most beautiful, productive, biodiverse, temperate rainforests of the world. This place that we call home has got some of the most diverse landscapes because of our mountainous regions, the most diverse climates. And because of that, we have a great diversity of animals and birds and fungi. And with that diversity brings great productivity. And so not only are our forests, our forested landscape diverse, but they have some of the greatest carbon stocks in the world, even as much as the tropical rainforests. The difference between our forests and tropical forests is that half of our carbon is in the soil, where we don't see it. The other half is above ground. And that is another great gift because, in a sense, all those creatures that are working underground are safe down there. You know, they're safe from the fires, more or less. They're safe from the floods. And so that also brings with it, for us, a great responsibility to look after those incredible carbon stocks. And it's not just here in British Columbia where it's safe. Actually, in Canada, 95% of our carbon in our forests is underground. It's in the permafrost, it's in the peatlands, it's in the forests and the prairies. And so really, Canada has an outsized role to play in protecting those incredible stocks. So these are special places. These are cathedrals. Next slide, please. And like I said, not just us depend on them, but the creatures like this one. This is a marbled murrelet. And the marbled murrelet depends on old-growth forests. They live on the great branches of these old trees, and they have their nests there. And when they go to feed, they fly out into the ocean to feed on the herring and the fish that are in the ocean. And then they come back to their nest sites. But if we have no old-growth trees, we have no marbled murrelets. If we have no old-growth trees, we have no screech owls or no spotted owls. And so all of these things, they are actually all connected together. It's been said over and over again, it is about connection in ecosystems. Connection and diversity is what makes these places so great. Next slide, please. Another amazing feature of our forest that is so unique to North America is our incredible salmon rivers. So in British Columbia, for example, we have huge mountains, as I said, and we have huge rivers that flow through these mountains, gathering up water from the mountainsides and in training them into these watersheds that eventually end up in the ocean. And the salmon are intimately linked with the forests. So all the salmon that go back to their natal streams eventually die and end up in the forest. Next, please. And people have long played an important role in the distribution of this salmon through our forests, to the point where, a lot of people call our forests salmon forests. So how do people play a role? Well, obviously we're having huge impacts on our salmon populations now through modern fishing practices, but ancient fishing practices, the impacts were also huge, but very positive, not very negative. And so here's an example of a fisherman of the Splatsin Nation, which is a nation in the larger Shepamek Nation where my family came from. And I come from a settler family, but the Splatsin people lived along the Shuswap River where my family settled, and they were great salmon fishermen. And the way this man is fishing is using a fishing weir. And the way it worked is that they have the slats that are spaced certain distances apart. And those slats were designed to allow certain sizes of fish to go upstream. And it was always kind of, in many fishing technologies in the nations in British Columbia, use this concept that you let the biggest fish go upstream, especially the big mother fish, because big fish create big eggs, which create big fish, and that grows populations. And through these tending practices or stewardship practices, these salmon populations were actually healthy and growing over time until the last 150 years. Okay, next slide, please. And so people were part of enhancing these populations. It's such a positive role of humans and their connection to nature. And the bears are in this story too, because the salmon that went upstream and spawned eventually died on the banks of the rivers, and the bears would come and pick up the salmon and carry them into the forest. And in my lab, we're actually tracing where that salmon ends up. And what we've found out is that most of the salmon, when you go into these forests in the fall, at this time of the year, if you go into a salmon forest, the forest floor is covered with salmon. They're half-eaten. The wolves and the bears have eaten parts of them, the brains and, parts that they really like, that we don't like, and left the rest there to decay. And so that decaying salmon ends up as proteins and then amino acids, and they get broken down more and more by the soil food web and picked up by the fungi in the soil. Next slide, please. And the fungi grab those amino acids with salmon nitrogen in them, and they take it into the tree. And this gives the trees the fertilization that they need in order to grow into these huge cathedral forests. And in fact, salmon forests, these forests are unique in the world as that they have some of the greatest carbon stocks of anywhere that, as a scientist, that I have measured. And so there's this unique cycle here when we're thinking of climate change and people and forests and animals and the roles we play. We think of ourselves as, the great, actually great destructors of our climate, but we actually are also the great balancers. If we just care for these ecosystems properly, by caring for them, we can actually encourage these ecosystems to become the great storehouses of carbon that they once were. Okay, next slide, please. And this, of course, is celebrated, right? Our ability as people to rejoice in this earth and care for and tend for its riches is celebrated in music that you just played. It was so beautiful, the water and the roots. It's celebrated in art. And this is a picture painted by April White, who is a Haida woman, who is celebrating here the connection between people and salmon. And what she's doing is she's actually returning the salmon bones to the water. And this isn't just a spiritual, cultural practice. This is actually a tending of the forest, because what she's doing is she's returning the bones and with it the calcium and the magnesium and all those micronutrients that the fish need in their spawning beds in order to have healthy streams. So it's all part of the caring, the tending of the earth. Next slide, please. And of course, things are getting a little out of hand, right? So we have this beautiful cycle, we have our great ingenuity, we have the ability to be balanced, and yet things have gotten a little out of hand. We've basically taken the responsibility of looking after the land from the people who knew how to do it and who did it for 10,000 years and gave it away to big corporations which aren't people. Right? And the corporations don't care for the land like we care for the land. So why did we give that away? And how can we get that back? But one of the consequences is this. And this is a picture that was actually taken back in the early 1980s near Clayoquot Sound, actually near Mears Island. And if you go to these places now, you can see the forests are growing back 70 years later, but what we're finding is that these forests they're not the old growth forests that they once were. In fact, the productivity and the carbon stocks in these forests is about a quarter of what they were. And then the next forest, next slide please, is planted like this, which is not an old growth forest. It's simple, it's like a cornfield. And so these have a fraction of the biodiversity, a fraction of the productivity, and a fraction of the carbon stocks. And so then they can't do all the other services that they are meant to do, like clean water and clean air. When we breathe in, we're breathing the air of the trees. And if we don't have trees that are able to do that in healthy forests, we're going to suffer. We are suffering. But we're doing this, right? But we don't have to do this. We know better than this. We can create a more diverse forest, or we can manage a more diverse forest. But what we're doing is we're simplifying them so much for profit that we have actually lost sight of the fact that these are our homes and we depend on them. Next slide, please. And that has come back to haunt us. As was said earlier, it's linked to fires and floods. It's linked to the heat dome, which is linked to the pandemic. All these things are linked together. Next slide, please. And unfortunately, recently, this is a picture from the Health territory. This was just in the news yesterday, where the Health have found 65,000 dead salmon in their streams, and they were hoping, this is Pink and Chum, they were hoping for a boomer run this year. That was the expectation, but they're saying it's because it's too warm. The streams are too warm. So, okay, so now I've taken you into a really depressed state, but I'm going to bring you back up again, I promise. Next slide, please. We have a climate emergency, but we have ourselves, and we have our brains and our kids, and we have the ability to do things differently. Next, please. And so I'm learning from the forest, and in my quest to find the mother tree, I'm going to tell you about what I've learned from these trees that my mom actually taught me already, and that has actually been known by our First Peoples for thousands of years. I've learned, after I did all this research in the university and through my career, learned that actually it's been known for a long time. But you'll have to humor me and listen to what I have to say. So after working in these plantations for about, 10 or more years, I thought, we're just ripping these ecosystems apart. We're disconnecting the connections, and I wanted to know more about the connections. So I started studying below-ground connections in forests like this. This is an interior forest in the Clackamas territory, and it's an old-growth Douglas fir forest, and there's trees of all ages here. Some are like 300 years old, some are 200, 100. There's some teenagers in there that are maybe 50, a 50-year-old teenager, imagine that. There's some seedlings that are 10 years old. So it's what we call a multi-cohort forest or an uneven age forest. So here, you have young trees growing up under the shadow of the old ones. And so I thought, well, let's look at, I'd heard about these fungal networks below ground, and I thought I'm going to study them in my forest near my home. And so I went below ground, next slide please, and looked at some of the fungi. And in that forest I just showed you, there's about 100 fungal species in it. I looked at one species and made a map with my grad student, Kevin Byler, and some of my colleagues, of what the fungal threads that actually can link the forest look like. So these fungi that I'm showing you, does anybody know what this one is? Amanita muscaria. Good. Is it good to eat? No, don't eat this fungus. Okay, it's poisonous. Okay, but it's mycorrhizal, which means that what happens is that the fungus finds the root of a little seedling, so the seedlings, like as a germinant, germinates, it grows its little roots, its radical into the soil, and that little radical starts to signal. It's sending off little chemical signals all around it, and the little radical, it moves around, it's searching, and at the same time there's these roots from these old trees that are also searching and growing and signaling, and the fungi are in there signaling and sending off little sodium and calcium signals that they pick up from each other, and they grow together and they bind together in a symbiosis. And that symbiosis works by the trees, the seedlings, and the big old trees providing photosynthate to the fungus, and the fungus, in return, grows through the soil in a huge mycelium and picks up water and nutrients from the soil and brings it back to the tree. And the trees, the old trees and the little trees, become colonized just by touching each other, by their roots touching each other, signaling, touching the fungus, and then pretty soon they form a big network. And this is a map that my student Kevin made, that probably if you've been following my talks, you've seen this map, but it's a pretty fascinating map. It took him 5 years to make this map. And what these circles represent are the trees. So think of those big old Douglas fir trees. The bigger, darker circles are the 300-year-old trees. And then there are smaller and smaller circles that are of lighter and lighter green colors and little yellow ones. Those are just smaller and younger trees. And the black lines that are joining the trees together are these fungi that are linking the trees together. So the way it works is you have the old trees, their cones open in the fall. In a Douglas fir, there's a huge cone crop this year, by the way. I think it's because of the heat dome, but it was a stress crop. But anyway, those seeds are going to fall in the fall, around now. The seeds fall onto the forest floor, they germinate, the little cotyledon goes up and a little radical goes into the ground. It becomes signaling, they're signaling constantly even as they fall, and they connect into the network of the old trees. And so these little seedlings then are dependent on these old trees to colonize them, to make them mycorrhizal. And if they were not mycorrhizal, they would not live. They would just die because they can't get enough water and nutrients on their own. What my students and I did subsequent to this is to try to figure out how do they do this? How do they support these little seedlings? Because, yeah, is it just that they provide the network, or is there something more to it? And so we started using isotopes and labeling these old trees with carbon-13, carbon-14, nitrogen-15, deuterated water, all kinds of things that we could get our hands on. And we just started tracing where these nutrients went, and we found that they went into the little seedlings. Not always, but often enough that we were able to detect, too, that the seedlings' survival increased when they were receiving these subsidies from the old trees. So there's a couple of things going on. Number one, the old trees are providing that sort of, that network for them to join into. You could think of it as a placenta, kind of. It's the placenta of the earth. The little ones are joining into it, and then they're getting the subsidies. So the mothers are providing through their nutrients and so on, the subsidies to these little seedlings. There's so much more to this story. So one of the other things one of my graduate students was working on was whether or not these old trees could tell which ones were their own, whether they were their own offspring. And in animal ecology, we call that kin selection or kin recognition. And we found out that these Douglas fir trees can recognize their kin. And the way we figured this out is we grew seedlings that were from stranger trees and from the self tree around a tree. So her own seeds plus the seeds of a stranger with connections and without connections to those old trees. And we found that they survived better. They survived better, they had better nutrition, they had more mycorrhizas, they had bigger root systems, they grew faster. So there we go. The mother trees really are nurturing their own young, just like my mom has done for me and all moms and all dads do for their kids. Okay, next slide. So what is a mother tree? I know we're all going, is that a mother tree? Is that a mother tree? Is that a mother tree? It is a mother tree. So they're just the biggest, oldest trees in the forest. But in fact, any tree can become a mother tree. Because all the trees around this tree are, they're growing, some of them die back, one tree will fall over and it'll make room for another one to grow up and take over the canopy. The forest is an incredibly dynamic place. So what was once a child or a teenager becomes a mother tree. And are there father trees? There are, sorry dads. We just call them mother trees because of that nurturing connotation, but actually Douglas fir has mothers and fathers in the same tree, and a lot of trees do. And in fact, in our First Peoples culture, in the Shepomet culture, there's a recognition of grandmother trees and grandfather trees, and mother trees and father trees. There's really no gender meant here. It's just to convey that notion that trees live in community, just like we live in community and family, and we are interdependent and interconnected. Next slide, please. And here's another tribute to my mom, is that even when the old trees die and lay on the forest floor, they're still part of life. They're still there teaching us. They're still there nurturing us. And in this case, what one of my students did, Gabriel Orrego from Chile, is he labeled one of those old trees in the background, it's a hemlock, with carbon-13, and he traced that carbon right into the log and into the little seedlings that are growing on that nurse log. And so the grandmother laying on the floor is helping the grandchildren, and she's also helping the mother tree back in the background, all linked together, all these generations together. Next slide, please. even before death, I should have switched these slides around, but even before death, as old trees are declining and passing on, going to the next life, becoming full of the soil food web, they start signaling their neighboring trees about their condition. And this signaling goes on through the air, and it goes on through the soil, through these mycorrhizal networks. So as you're feeling, oh, I'm about to pass on, like my mom did, she says, it's time to go, you need to prepare. That's what these trees are doing too. And so they send what we call volatile organic compounds through the air, as well as organic compounds through their mycorrhizal networks that warn or signal to the neighboring seedlings and surrounding trees that, hey, I'm on my way out, and there could be a cause. So we've looked at, whether they're infected by insects or pathogens, and they say, hey, there's something around that's causing me to be sick. And so that actually the neighbors will upregulate their own defense enzymes and protect themselves against whatever that is. So we don't understand a lot of the whys and even the hows. We do know that it happens, and I just think it's another great connection between the living, the dying, and the young coming up. Next, please. Actually, yeah. So there's a lot to learn here, and I don't mean to leave the animals out of this picture. This is a mother tree. I'm inside this mother tree. This is from Fairy Creek, actually, and I was there last fall inside this tree. So what I'm in is a 3,000-year-old yellow cedar tree in a bear den. And next slide, please. I didn't actually get to see the little bears, but I imagined what they're like. So the mama bears go into the dens, stay there for the winter and have their babies, and then they emerge in the spring. So that tree, which I was in with a reporter from the Seattle Times and the defenders at Fairy Creek. So a lot of students and elders. Elder Bill Jones was there, not at the site, but with us on that day. And it was a dramatic day and traumatic day, and 2 weeks later, this tree was cut down. So, and I'm saying this not to make you feel sad, but to fill you with, to join in and be part of the solution. We should not be cutting these trees down, but we are every single day. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to just end a little bit, just to link all this together to show that, everything is connected. The bears are connected to the trees are connected to the water, to the birds. Next slide, just kind of scroll through it a little bit. And this is what, scientists call a complex adaptive system, or an ecosystem is a complex adaptive system. It's adaptive, it changes, it's interdependent on the relationships between all the creatures in the forest. It's the relationships on which whole communities are built. It's relationships on which societies are built. It's how we care for each other. It's how we care for where we live, our planet Earth. They're incredible systems because they're adaptive, they change, they can adjust according to conditions. Next, please. And it's through all these relationships that you get emergent properties. Emergence is where you create something out of a bunch of parts that are, interacting. Our Mother Tree Network is emergent. The music that was made by the four of you on the stage is emergent. The healthcare of working with your patients, that's an emergent thing. It's something that's more than just the little bits that you do on their own. So ecosystems depend on this kind of emergence. They're beautiful. And by working with them, you can help them create more carbon, more water, more oxygen to recover, to heal themselves. Next, please. So we have a lot to learn from these trees, and I'm just going to end with a few things from the Mother Tree Network of the things that we think that we can do. Next, please. Not this. Next, please. Oh, yes, and to support this. Next, please. I'm going to end with this, is that what we're trying to do is save the forests so we can save ourselves. The forests, we are so interdependent. The forests regulate our climate, they hold our biodiversity. they take up most of our carbon, terrestrial carbon. Indigenous knowledge is so important in how to care for forests, because as Katlia was talking about, it's that knowledge learned over thousands of years. It's the knowing of the berries, it's the knowing of the salmon runs, it's the knowing of the land that the solutions arise from. So what we're asking for, from our governments, from our people, of what we need to do is to protect our forests. Protect our old growth forests. Let's stop cutting them down. I mean, every day we're losing old trees like that 3,000-year-old bearden tree. Every single day on this island alone. And elsewhere. To restore the forests that are damaged, the ones that we've simplified, those plantations, we need to revitalize them so that they're not operating at 25%, that they're operating at 100% or more. To increase their adaptive capacity, because they're going to become more maladaptive as climate changes. But we can play a role in that. We can move plants around. You know, we can put plants together that we know belong together. You know, we can help these forests to support our Indigenous people, because they have this incredible worldview about caring for the environment, for tending the forests, for having obligations to steward forests. And we need to learn from that, so all of us do that. And to establish learning networks so that and communities so that we can all learn from this, so that we can go into a forest and say, that's possible. I can do that in my forest. I can help other people do that too. And all of this will eventually lead to protecting our forests, storing more carbon, maybe even monetizing that carbon, and I won't go into that, but there is a huge possibility here that we can completely shift our economy so that we are looking after stuff instead of tearing it down. If we do all this stuff, these natural solutions can actually mitigate climate change, this is what scientists are saying, by a third. And the other 2/3 can come from the healthcare providers. I'm just kidding. From coming off of fossil fuels and switching to clean energy. So that's all I have to say, and thank you for listening, and I wish you all well. Thank you.
You've taken my breath away. You all have. Our presenters, I'll tell you who I am in a minute. I'm obviously, you can't hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. I'm not Dr. Al Hayashi. No, I'm not. But first off, I have to say, you've taken the film from our eyes, you've hurt and woken up our hearts, and you've left us with hope. That's a big job, and Dr. Simard, I thank you on behalf of all of us here. I also want to thank all three presenters and the quartet sprinkled around as you are. A word that I take away is emergent, just how each person spoke and played in a way that enhanced the one before and the one before. And these people didn't talk to each other ahead of time. They didn't collaborate on who was going to speak about what. And yet they connected in a way that connected with us. So I want to thank you all for doing that. Dr. Al Hayashi is doing surgery, as he does every day. Without him, this forum would probably not be here. He is one of the founders. He is the founder, along with the Lafayette String Quartet, of the Health Forest. and he couldn't be with us today, so I'm speaking in his behalf. My name is Darlene Hamill. I'm a family physician who's been on the panel that helps put these together with the Lafayette Quartet, and I am so grateful for my years of learning and growing with you. So if you have been to previous fora, you will know that we usually get questions from the audience, but tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have a panel that I will have given some thought to, some questions that you might want to ask, and I'll ask them on your behalf. So if I could invite the three speakers to come and have a seat at the front. I'll go over here. Oh, no, I'll go over here then. This is what good performers do, don't they? They go from side to side. So, and if you're short, you can't often see over top. So, the first question that I would like to ask our speakers, and any one of you can speak first, is you all touched on hope. You all left us with hope. I'm one person. What can each of us do now to make a difference in sustaining this planet? And how do we stand up to the big profits that sometimes overwhelm us, like those that ended up taking down that 3,000-year-old tree? Any one of you can speak first. Yeah, this mic.
Okay. Yeah, it's a huge question. It's the million-dollar question that we all want to know. There's so many things we can do. So I showed that map of the Mother Tree Network. That's a complex system, and it's based on the idea that local interactions build emergent things. The ability to fight climate change is an emergent thing out of people working together. And so local action really is important. So that means, mobilizing yourselves to do things like, supporting your kids to learn about nature, being out in nature, understanding nature. You probably all are like that. That's why you're here. But just being connected is important. That's the first step. And then working in your local community to raise awareness. Like, probably most people don't know that, a 3,000-year-old tree got cut down at Granite Creek beside Fairy Creek, and that it was a home to bears. So just getting the word out and raising knowledge. And then, of course, voting and holding your politicians to account. So we have a wonderful government, but but they're not doing what they said they would do, right? So we need to hold them to account. And how do we do that? We write to them, we vote, we mobilize. And, of course, and if you can't get out and mobilize yourself, to support people who can. The kids at Fairy Creek have put their life, and at different places around the province and the world, putting their lives on the line to protect Mother Earth. And they need support and care and love, and they're doing it for us, and of course themselves too. But I think we need to support that. And of course, supporting movements that are really also mobilizing, and supporting our Indigenous people, because they also are fundamental to solving this problem. So those are just 4 things. There are many other things, but so it's basically local, and we also need policies at high levels. We need policies at government and at global levels, because you can do all this local stuff, but if we still have policies that dampen our ability to do things, or that set limits too high, for example, greenhouse gas limits, then it doesn't matter, right? We need both. We need stuff from the top down and the bottom up, but really action and making those politicians change is what happens at the ground level. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing from you to us, what can we do walking out of here, is get involved. If we hear things, read things, it's not enough to cluck our tongues. We need to walk out and somehow get involved, even if it is just a letter.
Yeah, and I think too, if you're physicians, if you're writers, doctors, and so on, you have like these prominent levels in society, and you have a voice. And speaking out like you're doing is so important. Like, I learned so much from you tonight. And so when we have knowledge and information, we can act properly. If we don't have knowledge, we're in a vacuum. So use your status, use your knowledge and your wealth, if you have it, to mobilize and be active.
Thank you. That was inspirational. It's a hard act to follow. In terms of very practical solutions that you can enact today, walking out this door, threefold: make sure you go and spend time out in nature. Try to get a bicycle if you can. And thirdly, stay healthy. As long as you're able to stay healthy and minimize acute problems, the amount of carbon that you would need being a healthy person out into the real world is a lot less than being a person who is ill in hospital. If you have time and if you're lucky enough to have a primary care provider, please go and talk to them about your inhaler and see if a low carbon alternative is right for you. And last but not least, and I didn't actually get a chance to talk about this, but inhalers don't go in the trash. We know that a quarter of that 290 kilometers is after the inhaler has been disposed of and is continuing to leach out greenhouse gases for the remainder of its natural life until long after my great-grandkids will have come and gone. So please, they need to be returned to the pharmacy for appropriate disposal. They have to be incinerated.
Yeah, I would just say educate yourself on all of the different issues that are happening. At every corner, there's something that is climate related, including the inhalers and including the devastation of the old growth forests. And I think just get to know your local Indigenous nations and reach out and be an ally as much as possible, because they are really the guardians and they are doing a lot of the stewardship. And they need the support. They need the support to make sure that they can gain underlining title of so-called Canada so that they can fight these large corporations, because right now the jury's still out about underlining title, and Section 35 is a toolkit that we have that we can use, but we can't do that without support. So get to know your local Indigenous nations for sure, and those local knowledge keepers that can share really a wealth of knowledge. One person in particular from Sauk Nation, his name is Jeff Welsh. He is a cedar harvester, and he taught me a lot about the cedar trees. And he actually was up in my neck of the woods in the Northwest Territories, and he told me a story about our sacred tree that I actually wrote about in my novel. This House Is Not a Home, which just got released. That's my plug. We have a tree back home that is a 1,000-year-old tree, and it stands very tall at the river where we always used to gather as a people. And the elders always prophesize that once that tree falls, that is going to be a time of great change. And that tree fell right before COVID, and it was at the end of its life. And people from far and wide came to see our tree, our sacred tree, including Jeff Welsh. And he shared with me that he smudged the tree with his eagle feather. And when he returned back home here in Sauk Nation, he tried using his eagle feather, and it molted. It just fell apart. And every feather after that fell apart. And that was how strong the tree is. And the energy that comes off of those trees is so powerful and so sacred. And I think we all need to get in touch with our spirituality side of ourselves more. It's been lost somewhere. And I say that in this cathedral, but we really do need that to fight climate change as well.
Thank you all. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yes. Yeah, okay. Thank you for your heartfelt responses. I now will ask you just one more question, and that is, where do each of you find hope going forward?
Okay, I guess well, I have two daughters, and they've become foresters or forest ecologists, and they have wonderful, smart friends, and the kids are, well, they're in their early 20s. The kids are full of hope, and they're brilliant and ingenious, and we need to support them. And they're part of our big network. And that big network, as I described, is what we call a complex system. A complex system is built to be regenerative, right? We have children, they have children and more children. Trees have children and more, and passes on through generations. They're built to adapt and change. We're biological creatures. We have DNA that adapts and changes. We can learn, we're smart, we learn and change. And so these systems are constantly changing and adapting to the changes in the climate, in the environment. And they're always striving to healing, to resilience. I know that there is death and there is, some don't make it, but the system itself is designed, like there's designs in nature that are meant to keep building, to be regenerative like that. And when I learned that when I was studying complex systems mathematically, I thought, of course, this is what gives us hope. We're designed this way, right? We are built to survive. We're built to heal. We're built to thrive. And if we start taking away all the underpinnings and the parts, then we start to fall apart. But if we start doing things regeneratively, like healing the land, saving the old growth forests, restoring the damaged ones, it starts to build. And it follows this thing where it hits tipping points that aren't negative crashing ones, but positive ones, where suddenly you're taking up more CO2 than you could imagine if you do the right things, if you do those regenerative things. So that's what gives me hope, just by studying our forests and learning from the trees.
Thank you. I get my hope from events like this, seeing so many beautiful, brilliant, smart, like-minded people be attentive and being able to share information and knowledge, and seeing something click and somebody connect with a piece of information they didn't previously have, and knowing they're going to take that home and enact change in their own life is what makes me most hopeful.
Like Suzanne said, I feel very hopeful because nature is resilient like us. It can thrive through a lot of adversity, and it's faced a lot, and we're still healthy, and that says a lot, but we also must not take advantage of it. And also too, I wanted to mention that what gives me hope is the work that I'm doing with a national housing strategy, where we're trying to build off-grid houses in a way that goes back to tradition. A lot of people say, we can't go backwards, we have to go forwards, but we have to somehow combine the past with the future. So what we're doing with our group is looking at these off-grid traditional style homes that incorporate green technology to live off-grid. And it means getting uncomfortable with our luxurious lifestyles that we live, and kind of giving up a lot of what we have and what we're used to, and adapt to those changes. And in the Northwest Territories, my home, we are serial emitters of diesel. We are all on diesel, and we don't realize the carbon that's coming out of the NWT. Even though we're a small population of only 40,000 people, we are devastating, the environment with our diesel. So if we can get off diesel through the housing crisis, and also help the housing crisis, because a lot of Indigenous nations are living in inadequate housing situations that are a violation of human rights. So if we can do two things, one good for the planet and one good for the people, then it's a win-win. So I do have hope in the work that we're doing with our working group.
I speak, I think, on behalf of all of us when I speak with gratitude for the knowledge and the vision and the hope that you have shared with us. We see newspapers and the news looks grim, but you three are hopeful. And that's really something to take away. So thank you.
I second everything you just said, Darlene. What a remarkable evening, and how incredibly inspiring just the three of you have been, and you are a big part of the hope that we all have, I think, going forward. What an amazing evening for us to be here together with you. Thank you all. On behalf of Anne and Sharon and Joanna, I just really want to first thank the very Reverend Ansley Tucker for your opening remarks and for welcoming us to this venue, and the generous hospitality that we've had by having the idea of holding the forum here tonight. And to Donald Hunt and Mark McDonald, who were just so gracious the entire time that we worked with them to put this forum together. So really many thanks to you. And so much a thanks to the three of you, Val, Katlia, and Suzanne. We feel like you're our people now, just even from this afternoon. Thank you. Oh, it really has been an honor to have you, and we thank you for the awareness and the hope that you've offered on this topic, and that not only affects us all but concerns us all. And I believe we're all going away heartened and can see a lot of ways to go forward. And yeah, I'm going to ride my bike more, I promise. I am. Even with my cello on the back, I think. I've got to figure that part out. As this is our last forum, we also would like to again thank all the presenters that we have been fortunate to host over the years. I didn't count them, Darlene, did you? 68 people who presented through our 17 years. They are listed in the insert in your program, and I hope you will take a look at that. If any of you are here tonight in person, those of you online, we give you a big hug, but if any of you are here tonight, please stand. We'd love to see you and say hi, or just tell you that our lives have been enriched by you, and each year we've gained so much. So thank you to all of our past presenters. And I'd also like to draw your attention to the page of the program, that's the second one, where we mention many more that if I did try to go through all of those, I think Joanna might get the hook, or one of us. We just have to say we've got to be out of here. Stop talking, Pam. No. Anyway, the night isn't long enough for us to really go through all those, but please do read. We are so grateful. We also were grateful for Sheila being here again, and we spoke with her a little bit before. She's had to leave, but it's just magical that we had her with us tonight. And there was so much work done behind the scenes here, and also this evening, Leah, who's over here, and Mark McDonald, who was doing our live streaming, and the many volunteers who came tonight to help with just even registration, and we couldn't have enjoyed tonight without you, so thank you all who've been a part of that. And I'd like to have our committee, please stand, who you've seen a few of them because Amita and Darlene were so helpful, but Marian as well here, and Leah. And I don't know if Al made it. He was going to try to get here. He's still in surgery. No, I know, but he was maybe. But your part in this has just been amazing. We've worked on everything from choosing topics, researching the speakers, having very stimulating meetings with a lot of wonderful conversation, and even in our times at David Lamb, there would be cleaning up beforehand. I mean, we did anything and everything together, and just imagining together a healthy and more supportive world. And you really are the best, all of you. And we're going to have to find ways to still have a committee even when we don't have the forum, so I'm not sure. And last, but yes, thank you. Bravo. And last but not least, I have to say a huge thank you to the three of you for sharing this vision of it, kind of a not the usual thing a string quartet kind of takes on, but just because of the people that you are and the experience that we had together that we've kind of gone through. And so the music and the community that we've shared together has just been really, really special. It is our hope and in our heart that this forum, and particularly this topic, will inspire more future community initiatives. It may not be the Lafayette Health Awareness Forum, but something else. And I just want to make mention of a few things that I know are already going on. This cathedral holds a wonderful Earth Song series. I see John O'Riordan is here tonight and Francis Littman, and their work through both the Gail O'Riordan Climate and the Arts Legacy Fund and Creatively United are doing all kinds of things locally. So if we try to do the network, Suzanne, that you're thinking about, these are ones we know are right here that we can kind of take part in. They're wonderful books. I want to mention that Katlia's book, again, I'll help plug you there. It's so wonderful. She's even signed a few copies, I think, tonight. Would there be some for sale? Yes. So that we have wonderful authors who can be inspiring us. And of course, Suzanne's, we should have had you bring yours. We all have them. I forgot mine. I wanted her to sign it. But she brought hers. Okay. But there's so many ways to support our collective, and we want to be a part of that with you, and let's just keep going forward. So we want to thank you all for sharing in this project with us, and what is our other and perhaps even more expressive language is music. And so we want to finish the evening with playing together. And there are great notes in the program about the pieces, and this last piece was written for us by a dear friend, Eugene Weigel, who's passed on but has left enormous things for us. And this music is very much a piece of love. We share it with you in that feeling of love and connection. And as he quotes at the top of the piece, "In true love is found the origin of wisdom." And as we seek to find that wisdom together, that knowledge, here's to us all carrying it forward. Thank you for being with us tonight.